Hello, Robin, the PMP. Today I want to talk about the Pearson VUE whiteboard. A lot of people talk about the importance of a brain dump before you go into the PMP exam and knowing what you're going to write down on those 2 sheets of paper. Well, now with so many people taking the exam at home, this is done electronically, and it's changed some things, especially since the 49 processes after the exam changes in January of 2021 don't necessarily have the same weight that they had before. So let me walk you through a great tool that you can use to practice before your exam. It is on the Pearson VUE website, and as you can see, they give you an opportunity to practice with the whiteboard. It allows you to get familiar with the whiteboard before your exam, which I think is a great thing. It also gives you a description of all the tools that you're going to have available to you. For instance, you're going to have a pen, and you'll have an eraser. You'll have the use of lines, a rectangle, a circle. Text, I think, is the one that I use the most, at least when I took the PMP for the second time, I used the text feature. I found that a lot easier to work with than the pen. Didn't take up as much room. It was much easier to just kind of type out my thoughts. I know that a lot of people say give yourself about 10 minutes to use that brain dump when you enter your exam or when that exam starts, and I think that's really important. Think of this really as your study notes. Your whiteboard should really have the information that you think you're going to need to pass the exam. I know that my whiteboard really evolved. The more mock questions I took, the more my whiteboard evolved. And the reason why is what I would do is before I took a mock exam, I would come to this site and I would do my brain dump. Then, because I was taking a mock exam, if there was a term or something I just wasn't familiar with, when I looked it up, I would add that information to my whiteboard, and then I would take a picture of my whiteboard either with my phone or with a snipping tool after my mock exam was over so that my whiteboard could evolve and I knew what hints I was using and what hints I wasn't. So let's scroll down and actually take a look at this whiteboard. This is a sample of a couple of tips that I needed before my exam. Rather than writing out the full 49 processes, I really felt I didn't need to do that. But what I did need to do was I needed to remember that there were 5 process groups and that there were 10 knowledge areas. This might not sound like a big thing, but for some reason, I always confuse the two. I'm sure I'm going to be doing that for years. So this way I remember, I was reminding myself what that was. And then I actually even went so far as to type a little prompt for myself. So here we have our process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and then closing. I like to do the C for monitor and control small, and that way I just remember it's part of the same process group. And then in regards to knowledge areas, and so now I have my integration, my schedule, my scope. Okay, here we go. My integration, my scope, my schedule, my cost, my quality, my resources, my communication, my risk, my procurement, and my stakeholder. So I didn't need to write down the 49 processes because I knew if I gave myself that hint, I wouldn't need to draw the table. I also like to put commas between scope, schedule, and cost and the rest of my knowledge areas. And that was to remind myself of 2 things. One, that those 3 areas scope, schedule, and cost all had baselines. It was also to remind me that none of them had a process involved with executing. It was just a way for me to remember a pattern. Over here, what I also did was I also would put down, for instance, with my process groups, how many processes were in each group. And that way I remembered that there were 2 processes in initiating, 24 in planning, etc., and that there was just 1 in closing. This was also really key so that I didn't have to create that table. Now, I will tell you that I did have to remind myself, for some reason, I really struggled with risk. It was really hard for me to remember when I was trying to draw the table before I realized that I was going to be doing this virtually, how many processes were in risk and what they were. So that one I did remind myself. I put down the word risk, I put a 5 there, and then I gave myself initials to kind of help me through that. Right? So right here we have our plan, risk, response. Here we have the reason we have a 2 there is for our qualitative and our quantitative. And right here we have identify risks, and then of course our plan, risk management. Now, if you're wondering about the critical path, this is how I chose to draw that. So notice how I decided to show the dependency that C and D had with B, and that E was dependent on both C and D. I know that that's a very, very simple critical path, but it can be as simple as this if you're drawing it out. And then if you need a line, I can just take a line and I can draw it if that makes it a little easier to identify. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I also have an erase tool, so if I didn't need something anymore, I can also get rid of it. I hope that this is helpful. I wish you luck on your exam, and let me be the first to congratulate you for getting your PMP in 2021. Have a great night.